Up next, spreading the positive news around York, our York Media is up next.
Hi, we're Will and Rebecca Hanlon. We're the founders of Our York Media.
We started our careers in traditional journalism. We both used to work for the local newspaper. And from the course of time when we started working there till when we left, there were a lot of changes that took place that have happened on a national scale, from budgets being cut to staff sizes going down, and community coverage that used to be at the heart of the newspaper industry had been left at the wayside. Last summer, we launched a series called Neighbors of Our York, and for us, that was an experiment to expand what we were doing with community coverage. Neighbors of Our York is an opportunity to tell the stories of the everyday people in our community, from community activists to emergency responders, and just the everyday people who maybe are doing things that wouldn't make traditional headlines, but in their own way, they're contributing to York's narrative. The immediate response from neighbors was this outpouring of an audience of this own unique following to neighbors, where it was organically outperforming anything else that we were producing. And we saw a community hungry for good news stories, for the type of coverage that had been left behind, and we knew that we could fill that gap. But Neighbors is just the start for us.
So with the grant from YorIT, we want to expand on our Neighbors coverage. We want to produce a video series based on what we've previously done with Neighbors. We also want to do a video and audio podcast interviewing catalysts who have made York a better place.
We also want to expand upon the in-depth feature stories that we can produce, knowing that we can give a voice to some of those people that haven't had one in the York community. So helping tell the stories related to the growing Latino population, talking about what neighborhood associations are doing and how they're contributing to better communities. And in general, showing that what York is doing in terms of its revitalization today is not the climax for York, but it's the launching point to what's going to happen in the future. We know that through these stories, we can inspire people, we can provoke conversation and dialogue, we can show that there's so much more to York than what people are used to seeing in more traditional headlines.
You know, part of why we started Our York Media was to reinvent local media, reimagine what it could be. We don't have a political or any sort of agenda really other than show York County what good things are happening here.
I think we're most excited for the opportunity to get people on board with what it is that we want to do, to get them excited for the things that are happening in York County, to get them plugged into the people who are making a difference. And whether that's them learning about opportunity to get involved, to be educated on what other people are doing, or to be inspired to start their own thing because they would know that they're not alone in what it is that they're trying to do. We're just excited for the opportunity that that's what Our York Media can become, and that's what Our York Media is going to be for York County.
Okay. Stories have the power to shape public discourse. Today, many of us get our news from social media. And judging by the disproportionately bad headlines in our feeds, York's a pretty awful place. Growing crime, failing businesses, no parking. Now, many of us here today know that isn't the case. But when so many other people are seeing so much of the bad stuff, York's public relations problem isn't going to change. Now, we can't stop people from sharing bad news, and we sure can't stop local media from publishing so much of it. But here's the good news. There's no shortage of positive things happening every day in every corner of our community. And together, we could change the conversation.
We're Will and Rebecca Hanlon, and we started our careers with the local newspaper. But after several years of working there, we noticed something going on outside of the newsroom. York was going through a revitalization, and we admired the people leading the transformation. We decided we didn't want to just cover York's story. We wanted to be part of it. I left the paper, and about a year later, Will was laid off. And we saw it as an opportunity, not just for us, but for York. What if we didn't have to accept today's media environment for what it was? What if local media wasn't driven by clicks? What if, instead of complaining about what local media does and doesn't cover, what if we created our own media company? So that's what we did. We made our own media company with our own rules that gave us ownership of our story, but most importantly, gave others ownership of theirs, and we called it Our York Media.
Today, Our York Media is York County's good news outlet. We're all digital with the editorial and production quality today's smartphone users expect. We serve York with stories that inspire our audience, stories that strengthen the community. Now, last summer, we started a little series called Neighbors of Our York. It's a weekly feature that highlights the different people woven into York County's fabric.
The response to Neighbors has been phenomenal. We found the stories we wrote not only lifted up the people that we featured, but the people who read them. Within 14 hours of writing about John Beck, York's free hugs guy, he was contacted to speak at a local event to share his story. When we wrote about a veteran impacted by donations, people picked up the phone to ask how they could help. With Neighbors, we found a community hungry for good news.
So with the YorIT grant, we're going to publish more of these good news stories. We plan to add a video series that accompanies our already popular Neighbors of Our York feature. It's going to give people a new way to consume these feel-good profiles. We're also going to launch a podcast. It's an interview style where we'll talk with the people who have contributed to York's revitalization. We're going to call it Catalysts.
In addition to that, we want to expand on our news coverage through a series of in-depth enterprise pieces that highlight the changemakers who are pushing York into the future. Through these stories, we can give a voice to York's growing Latino population. We can highlight the budding entrepreneurs who are pushing York forward. And we can connect the underserved parts of our community with the opportunities that they need to be part of York's revival.
Now, community news is a dialogue. And just as we encourage people to nominate neighbors for us to cover, we want to include the input of York to tell us the stories that are going on. That's why we formed a council of community members that could tell us what kind of stories we should be covering, what kind of stories are no one else telling.
This Good News Council includes local activists, community leaders, and caring residents like Lou Rivera, Richard Craighead, Mary Beth Chang, and Katie Hartman, among others. And it includes a potential seat for a YorIT member to join us at the table as we discuss the stories that we want to tell that no one else is covering. The council represents the different demographics of York County. They'll help us give voices to those who need it most. They'll help us lead the conversation. They'll additionally help us spread good news to their respective circles, causing a ripple effect of positivity that will show York County isn't such an awful place after all.
The infrastructure's in place. We've created the platform. We've assembled our team. Our audience is growing every single day. An investment from the YorIT grant will infuse the means to immediately start producing the content that could change the narrative of York. By making our news feeds a better place, we can make York a better place.
We can show that portraits of our neighbors can be more impactful than mugshots of suspects. We can show that free hugs can be more powerful than stray bullets, especially if those are the stories that York is reading. Let's tell them together.